Enne's heart pounded with fear and revulsion at his words. She shook her head vehemently, her voice trembling as she refused his despicable offer. I I can't do that, she whispered, her voice brimming with tears. I won't. Once upon a time, in the peaceful village of Ekuru, where the air was filled with the scent of ripe mangoes and the sound of laughter echoed through the streets, there lived a young girl named Ene. Ene was a bright 13-year-old with a heart as pure as the crystal clear streams that flowed through the village. Ene lived with her mother Nene and her two younger brothers Chidi and Obi. Their home was a cozy little hut with walls made of mud and a thatched roof that kept them warm and dry during the rainy season. Despite their humble surroundings, Ene and her family were rich in love and happiness. Ene was a diligent student in her junior class at the village secondary school. She was always eager to learn and soak up knowledge like a sponge. But her thirst for knowledge did not end in the classroom. After school, Ene would rush home to help her mother sell yams at the village market. Together, they would set up their stall and greet customers with warm smiles. Good afternoon, Mama Ene. How are you today? The villagers would say as they stopped to buy yams. We are doing well, thank you, Ene would reply cheerfully, her eyes twinkling with kindness. As the sun began to set and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Ene and her mother would pack up their stall and head home. The walk back was filled with laughter and chatter as they shared stories from their day. Back at home, Nene would light a fire in the hut and start preparing dinner while Ene helped with chores around the house. Despite being tired from a long day's work, Ene never complained. She knew that helping her mother was important and she did it with love in her heart. After dinner, the family would gather around the fire to eat, talk, and pray together. Ene would listen intently as her mother told stories of their ancestors and the traditions of their village. It was during this moment that Ene's dreams of becoming an engineer began to take shape. Mama, do you think I can become an engineer one day? Ene asked one evening as they sat by the fire. Nene smiled lovingly at her daughter. Of course, my daughter, with your intelligence and determination, you can achieve anything you set your mind to. Encouraged by her mother's words, Ene vowed to work even harder to make her dream a reality. Every day, she poured herself into her studies and helped her mother at the market with renewed enthusiasm. Ene's father, Maziobi, had passed away a few years ago, leaving Nene with the heavy responsibility of taking care of the family on her own. Despite the hardships, Nene worked tirelessly to provide for her children, with Ene by her side every step of the way. One sunny afternoon, as Ene and her mother were setting up their yam store at the village market, a familiar figure approached them. It was Mr. Egu, Ene's uncle, who had been living in the city for many years. Good afternoon, Nene. How are you and the children? Mr. Egu greeted them warmly. We are managing, thank you, Nene replied with a smile. After exchanging pleasantries, Mr. Egu revealed the reason for his visit. I have some business in the village, but I also wanted to speak with you about something important. Nene looked at him curiously. What is it, Egu? Mr. Egu cleared his throat before continuing. I have been thinking a lot about Enne's future. She is a bright girl with so much potential. I believe she deserves a better education than what she can get here in the village. Nene's eyes widened in surprise. What do you mean? I mean, Mr. Ego explained, I would like to take Enne with me to the city. There, she can attend a good school and have access to opportunities that she wouldn't have here. Enne's heart skipped a beat as she listened to her uncle's words. The idea of leaving her family and the only home she had ever known filled her with fear and uncertainty. But Uncle Egu, Ernest spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. I don't want to leave Mama and my brothers. They need me here. Nene reached out and gently squeezed Ernest's hands. My dear, I know it's hard to leave, but this is an opportunity we cannot afford to pass up. You deserve a chance to pursue your dreams, and your uncle is offering you that chance. Tears welled up in Ernest's eyes as she realized the truth in her mother's words. With a heavy heart, she agreed to go with her uncle to the city. That evening, Erne packed her few belongings into a small bag, her heart heavy with mixed emotions. As she said goodbye to her family, tears streamed down her cheeks, and she hugged them tightly, knowing that it would be a long time before she saw them again. Take care of yourself, my dear, Nene whispered, holding Ene close. And remember, no matter where you go, you will always have a home here with us. With a final goodbye, Ene followed her uncle out of the village, leaving behind everything she had ever known. But as she walked away, she carried with her the hope of a brighter future and the love of her family guiding her every step of the way. As Ene and her uncle arrived in the bustling city, the sights and sounds overwhelmed her senses. Tall buildings towered overhead, and the streets were crowded with people rushing about their day. Despite the excitement of being in a new place, Ene couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at her heart. Mr. Egu led Ene through the bustling street until they reached his electrical store. As they entered, Ene noticed the smell of wires and the hum of electricity that filled the air. She followed her uncle inside, feeling a sense of apprehension creeping over her. Wait here, Ene, Mr. Egu instructed as he disappeared into his office. Ene nodded silently and took a seat in the reception area, her heart pounding with nervous anticipation. She watched as the other workers bustled about, their movements quick and efficient. Suddenly, a young man with grease-stained hands approached her. Hello, he said with a friendly smile. I'm Onyema, one of the apprentices here. What's your name? I'm Ene, she replied softly, returning his smile. Onyema nodded and went about his work, leaving Ene to her thoughts. Minutes passed, and Ene's anxiety grew with each passing second. Finally, Mr. Egu emerged from his office and motioned for Ene to join him. Ene hesitated for a moment before entering the office, where her uncle was waiting for her. She took a seat opposite him, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. Ene, my dear, Mr. Egu began, his voice smooth and persuasive. I want to talk to you about something important. Ene listened intently as her uncle spoke, but as his words began to take a sinister tone, her heart sank like a stone in her chest. You know, Ene, Mr. Egu said with a sly smile, you are a very beautiful young girl, and I can't help but notice how quickly you are growing up. Ene's stomach churned as she realized the true nature of her uncle's intentions. Fear clenched her heart as he spoke of things that made her skin crawl. I I don't understand. Ene stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm only 13. I can't do anything like that. Mr. Egu's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold determination. Don't be afraid, Ene. I will make it worth your while. Just do as I say, and everything will be fine. With a sinking feeling in her stomach, Ene knew she had to get out of there before things get any worse. She bolted from her uncle's office, tears streaming down her face as she fled back to the safety of the reception area. Onyema looked up in surprise as Ene burst through the door, her eyes wide with fear. Without a word, she ran to sit back at the reception, her heart pounding in her chest as she put as much distance between herself and her uncle's office as possible. Later in the evening, Mr. Egu emerged from his office and called for Ene to join him. With a heavy heart and weary eyes, Ene followed her uncle out to the waiting car. The ride home was quiet, the tension palpable in the air. Ene sat in silence, her mind racing with thoughts of the encounter with her uncle earlier that day. She couldn't shake the feeling of fear that clung to her like a shadow, casting a dark cloud over her hopes for a better future. When they arrived at Mr. Egu's house, Ene was greeted by a bustling household filled with laughter and chatter. Mr. Egu's wife, Akwanwa, welcomed her with a warm embrace, while his children greeted her with smiles and curious glances. Welcome, Ene, Akwanwa said kindly. We are so glad to have you here with us. Ene managed a weak smile in return, her mind still reeling from the events of the day. As Mr. Egu introduced her to his children, Ene couldn't help but feel a punch of sadness at the thought of her own family back in the village. Mr. Egu's eldest son, Chidebere, greeted her with a friendly nod, while his daughter Amarachi took her hand and led her inside. The younger children, Mmesoma and Osita, followed closely behind, their eyes wide with curiosity. Amarachi showed Ene to the room she would be sharing with her and Mmesoma. The room was cozy and inviting, with two beds neatly made and a small window overlooking the street below. We are so happy to have you here, Ene, Amarachi said with a smile. You are going to love it with us. Ene nodded, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She thanked Amarachi and Mmesoma for their kindness before joining them for dinner. As they sat around the table, Ene couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. She tried to push aside her worries and focus on the delicious meal laid out before them. But her mind kept drifting back to the haunting memory of her uncle's words and the way he had looked at her with hunger in his eyes. After dinner, Ene took a quiet bath and retreated to her bed. exhaustion weighing heavily on her. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the soft breathing of her new sisters, she couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled in the pit of her stomach. But amid the fear and uncertainty, Ene clung to the glimmer of hope. She prayed that her uncle's unsettling behavior was just a one-time occurrence and that she would soon find peace and happiness in her new home. In the quiet darkness of the night, Akwanwa entered her daughter's room, her expression stern and unwelcoming. She held a mat in her hands, and with a harsh voice, she woke Ene from her slumber. Ene, you will sleep on the mat tonight. Akwanwa commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. Confusion clouded Ene's mind as she glanced between Akwanwa and the bed she had shared with Amarachi and Mmesoma. Before she could question why, Amarachi spoke up, puzzled by her mother's sudden decision. But Mama, there is enough room for all of us on the bed. Amarachi protested. Akwanwa's eyes flashed with anger and she silenced her daughter with a sharp rebuke. I said, you will sleep on the mat, Ene, no questions. With a heavy heart, Ene obeyed, slipping off the bed and settling onto the hard surface of the mat. Tears pricked at her eyes as she tried to make sense of the sudden change in treatment. The next morning dawned bright and hopeful, but the lingering sting of Akwanwa's harsh words still hung in the air. As the family gathered for their morning devotion, Ene couldn't shake the feeling of isolation that settled over her like a dark cloud. After prayers, they all set about their daily chores, and Amarachi took Ene to their closet to share some of her old dresses with her. Ene's heart swelled with gratitude as she accepted the generous gesture, hugging Amarachi tightly. But their moment of kindness was short-lived. Just as Ene began to try on the dresses, Akwanwa burst into the room, her face twisted with anger. What do you think you are doing? She barked at Ene, her voice sharp and cutting. Amarachi tried to intervene, but her mother's wrath was swift and unrelenting. With a cold glare, Akwanwa snatched the dresses away from Ene and handed them back to Amarachi, forbidding her from sharing anything with Ene ever again. Tears welled up in Ene's eyes as she watched the exchange unfold. She felt like an outsider, unwanted and unloved by the woman who should have been her guardian. Akwanwa turned her icy gaze on Ene, her voice dripping with disdain. You will stay out of our things and mind your own business. Understood? With a heavy heart, Ene nodded, her spirit crushed by Akwanwa's cruelty as she retreated from the closet. She couldn't help but feel like a burden to her new family, a burden they would rather do without. But amid the pain and rejection, Ene clung to the flicker of hope that burned within her. She knew that no matter how harshly she was treated, she would never give up on her dreams or the belief that one day she would find a place where she truly belonged. As the sun beat down relentlessly on the city, Ene found herself summoned by Akwanwa to receive a harsh and unfair decree. With a stern expression on her face, Akwanwa informed Ene that she was not a member of the family, but a maid. You are here to work, Akwanwa declared coldly. You will do all the house chores without help from anyone, from cooking to washing, cleaning, and going to the market. You will not watch TV or sit on a couch for any reason. Ene's heart sank like a stone as she listened to Akwanwa's list of demands. The weight of her new responsibilities bore down on her shoulders, threatening to crush her under their burden. But Mama, I'm only 13, Ene protested weakly, her voice trembling with fear. Akwanwa's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp with impatience. Age is irrelevant. You are here to serve, and you will obey my orders without question. With a heavy heart, Ene nodded in resignation, knowing that she had no choice but to comply with Akwanwa's harsh demands. She felt like a prisoner, trapped in a never-ending cycle of servitude and abuse. From that day forward, Ene's life became a relentless cycle of toil and hardship. She woke before dawn to prepare breakfast for Akwanwa's children and pack their lunches for school. Throughout the day, she toiled tirelessly, washing clothes by hand, scrubbing floors, and running errands for Akwanwa. Despite the modern conveniences available in the house, Ene was forbidden from using them. She washed clothes by hand, cooked over an open fire, and cleaned with nothing but a bucket of water and a rag. Her meals consisted of meager scraps leftovers from the family's table, and she was often forced to sleep on the veranda, exposed to the elements and the harsh realities of her new life. Despite the glimmer of hope that had sparked within Enna's heart when she first arrived in the city, the promise of education seemed to slip further and further away with each passing day. Mr. Egu and his wife Akwanwa refused to send Ene to school, leaving her trapped in a life of servitude and hardship. One fateful day, Mr. Egu summoned Ene to his office, his eyes cold and calculating as he delivered a chilling ultimatum. He told Ene that the only way he could send her to school was if she accepted his vile proposal to become his secret mistress, to be at his beck and call whenever he desired. Ene's heart pounded with fear and revulsion at his words. She shook her head vehemently, her voice trembling as she refused his despicable offer. I I can't do that, she whispered, her voice brimming with tears. I won't. Mr. Abel's face twisted with rage at her defiance. Then you will suffer in my house, he spat, his voice dripping with venom. You will never see the inside of a classroom as long as you live under my roof. And true to his words, Enna's dreams of education were shattered as she was forced to remain home, trapped in a never-ending cycle of back-breaking labor and abuse. Each day became a living nightmare for Enne as she toiled from dawn to dusk. Her hands, raw and blistered from scrubbing floors and washing clothes. She ran errands for the family, cooked their meals, and tended to their every whim, all while enduring the scorn and contempt of Mr. Egu and his wife. Akwanwa, fueled by jealousy and resentment, poisoned her children's minds against Ene, turning them against their own sister. Amarachi, once a source of comfort and solace, now joined in the cruelty, hurling insults and accusations at Ene for reasons unknown. With each passing day, Ene's spirit grew weaker and weaker under the weight of her burdens. She longed for the warmth and love of her mother's embrace, but Nene remained blissfully unaware of her daughter's suffering, trusting Mr. Egu to care for her as he had promised. But behind closed doors, Ene's cries for help went unheard as she languished in the shadows, her dreams fading like distant memories in the harsh reality of her new life. As time passed, the darkness in Mr. Egu's heart only grew deeper, and he began to take advantage of Enne's vulnerability during the nights she spent sleeping on the cold veranda floor. Despite her tearful pleas for mercy, her cries fell upon deaf ears, and the abuse continued relentlessly. The cruelty inflicted upon Ene reached new depths when she began menstruating. With no understanding or compassion, Akwanwa callously dismissed Ene's request for sanitary pads, instead instructing her to make do with pieces of old clothes. Ene longed to confide in Akwanwa about the horrors she endured at the hands of Mr. Egu, but the words caught in her throat, suffocated by fear and shame. In addition to the physical and emotional torment, Ene faced relentless punishment for even the slightest mistakes. The stench of the whip and ignoring hunger became constant companions, and she endured days of starvation and brutal beatings. With each passing day, the weight of Ene's suffering became unbearable until finally she could bear it no longer. In a desperate bid for freedom from the hellish nightmare that had become her life, Ene fled from the prison of Mr. Egu's house. Alone and terrified, Ene sought refuge in the shelter of an uncompleted building, where she hoped to find solace in death's embrace. For 3 agonizing days, she languished in darkness, her body weakened by hunger and thirst, her spirit broken by the relentless cruelty she had endured. But as the days dragged on and no one came looking for her, Ene's despair deepened. The realization that she was utterly alone in the world, abandoned by those who should have protected her, was a bitter pill to swallow. Ene's heart ached with longing for the warmth and safety of her mother's embrace, yearning to escape the torment of Mr. Egu's house and return to the village where she belonged. With tears streaming down her cheeks, she wished desperately for a way to flee the nightmare that had become her reality. After 3 agonizing days of hiding in the shadows of an uncompleted building, earnest prayers were answered when a kind-hearted man discovered her plight and offered her a lifeline to safety. Despite her pleas to remain hidden, the man insisted on taking her home, concerned for her well-being in such a dangerous place. Reluctantly, Ene followed the man back to Mr. Egu's house, her heart heavy with fear and apprehension. But her hopes for salvation were quickly dashed when Mr. Egu greeted the man with false assurances of Ene's well-being, painting her as a disobedient child in need of discipline. As the man departed, leaving Ene once again in the clutches of her tormentor, Mr. Egu's rage boiled over, unleashing a torrent of violence upon her trembling form. With each blow, Ene's cries for mercy fell on deaf ears, until she was left bruised and broken, her spirit crushed beneath the weight of her suffering. Retreating to the solace of the bathroom, Ene wept bitter tears of despair, wishing with all her heart that she had never returned to the hellish prison that was Mr. Egu's house. That night, as she lay on the cold veranda, her body racked with pain, Mr. Egu's vile touch invaded her once again, leaving her feeling dirty and violated. But this time, something inside Ene snapped. With a surge of newfound courage, she fought back against her abuser, striking him with all the strength she could muster. and before fleeing into the night. As dawn broke over the horizon, Mr. Egu concocted a sinister lie to cover up his own wrongdoing, accusing Ene of a violent attack that left him injured. Akwanwa, blinded by her loyalty to her husband, punished Ene mercilessly for her supposed transgression, beating her until she lay battered and broken at her feet. Weeks passed, and the weight of Ene's suffering grew heavier with each passing day. As her body weakened and her spirits waned, a new torment emerged, a relentless sickness that left her vomiting and weak. Concerned for her well-being, Akwanwa took Ene to the hospital, hoping for answers to the mysterious ailment that plagued her. The doctor's diagnosis was a cruel blow. Ene was pregnant. Akwanwa recoiled in shock, unable to comprehend the horrifying truth that her own husband was responsible for such an unspeakable crime. Turning to Ene with disbelief in her eyes, she demanded to know the identity of the perpetrator, only to be met with tears and a trembling voice as Ene confessed the unthinkable truth. In a moment of rage and denial, Akwanwa silenced Ene's cries with a sharp slap, refusing to accept the damning accusation against her husband. But as the weight of Ene's words sank in, Akwanwa's heart shattered into a million pieces, torn between her loyalty to her husband and the brutal reality of his monstrous deeds. Returning home, Akwanwa confronted Mr. Egu, her heart heavy with sorrow and betrayal. With trembling lips, he confessed to the heinous crime, begging his wife to keep their dark secret hidden from the world. In a moment of shared guilt and desperation, they made a pact to rid themselves of the unborn child, seeking the help of a herbalist to carry out their sinister plan. With blood money exchanged and promises made, they watched in silence as the herbalist performed her gruesome task, extinguishing the life growing within Ene's womb. But as they returned home, the weight of their sin hung heavy in the air, choking them with guilt and shame. That night, as Ene lay, writhing in agony, her cries for help fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the suffocating silence of her betrayers. And when the morning sun rose over the horizon, it revealed a tragic scene. Ene, cold and lifeless, her innocent soul extinguished by the cruelty of those who should have protected her. In a panic, Akwanwa and Mr. Egu were left with the harrowing task of covering up their crimes, their hearts heavy with the burden of their sins. But as they stood over Ene's lifeless body, they knew that no amount of deceit or denial could erase the truth of their monstrous actions, leaving them to grapple with the haunting echoes of their betrayal for the rest of their days. Desperate to conceal their heinous crime, Akwanwa and Mr. Egu concocted a sinister plan to dispose of Ene's lifeless body. Under the cloak of darkness, they ventured to a remote location and buried her remains in an unmarked grave, hoping to bury the truth along with her. Returning home, they feigned innocence, pretending that Ene was merely ill and recovering in the hospital. Their children, unaware of the grim reality, accepted their parents' lies with trusting hearts, unaware of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. Days turned into weeks, and Mr. Egu journeyed back to the village, his heart heavy with the weight of his deception. With feigned concern, he informed Nene and Ene's siblings of her disappearance, promising to search tirelessly until she was found. Nene and her children wept bitterly, their hearts heavy with grief and worry for their missing loved one. They pleaded with Mr. Egu to bring Ene home safely, clinging to the hope that she would soon return to them unharmed. But as the days stretched on and Ene remained missing, her restless spirit refused to find peace. In the dead of night, she appeared before Amara, her spectral form illuminated by an otherworldly glow. With tears in her eyes, she revealed the truth of her untimely demise, accusing her parents of her murder. Shocked and horrified by the revelation, Amara confronted her parents, her voice trembling with anger and disbelief. But Akwanwa and Mr. Egu denied their guilt, spinning a web of lies to deceive their daughter and maintain their facade of innocence. Undeterred by their deceit, Amara urged her parents to confess their sins and return Ene's body to the village, warning them of the consequences if they refused to heed her warning. But Akwanwa and Mr. Egu, consumed by their own greed and pride, refused to listen to reason, choosing instead to cling to their illusion of innocence. Yet, as time passed, the weight of their sins began to take its toll. Mr. Egu's once prosperous business crumbled, leaving him destitute and broken. Akwanwa, once proud and strong, found herself afflicted with sudden blindness, robbed of her sight as punishment for her complicity in Ene's murder. Their children, once obedient and respectful, turned against them, their hearts hardened by the darkness that pervaded their home. With each passing day, the once proud Egu family descended into chaos and despair, haunted by the vengeful spirit of the daughter they had betrayed. And as they faced the consequences of their actions, they were forced to confront the truth of their guilt, their lives forever tainted by the blood on their hands. In a moment of reckoning, Akwanwa and Mr. Egu found themselves facing the damning truth of their crimes. With heavy hearts and tear-streaked faces, they made the harrowing journey back to the village, carrying with them the weight of their guilt and the body of the daughter they had betrayed. As they stood before the villagers, their voices trembling with remorse, they confessed to the unspeakable act they had committed, begging for forgiveness and redemption. But the villagers, their hearts hardened by the magnitude of their betrayal, met their pleas with anger and condemnation. With voices raised in righteous indignation, they cast Akwanwa and Mr. Egu out of their village, banishing them forever from the community they had once called home. Nene, her heart shattered by the loss of her beloved daughter, wept bitter tears of regret and sorrow. She cursed Mr. Egu and his wife for the pain and suffering they had inflicted upon her family, vowing never to forgive them for the evil they had wrought. As time passed, the weight of their sins bore down upon Mr. Egu and Akwanwa with a relentless fury. Mr. Egu's sickness grew worse with each passing day, his body ravaged by decay and disease. His wife, once proud and strong, remained blind for years, her sightless eyes a constant reminder of her complicity in their daughter's death. Their children, once loyal and obedient, watched in silent sadness as their parents suffered the consequences of their actions. And when Mr. Egu finally succumbed to the agony of his sickness, his passing marked the end of a dark and tumultuous chapter in their lives. For Nene and her children, the wounds of betrayal ran deep, their hearts forever scarred by the pain of their loss. But in the midst of their grief, they found solace in the knowledge that justice had been served and that their daughter's spirit could finally rest in peace. And as the years passed and life returned to a semblance of normalcy, Ene appeared to her mother one final time in a dream. Her ethereal form bathed in light. With a gentle smile, she whispered words of comfort and guidance, urging her mother to protect her siblings from harm and to never forget the love they shared. And with those final words of wisdom, Ene's soul found peace at last, her spirit soaring free from the bonds of earthly pain and suffering. And so, the story of Ene's life came to a close, a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and redemption in the face of unimaginable darkness. The lesson from this story is clear. Parents must be conscious about who they entrust their children to. Rather than sending them away to serve as maids, parents should prioritize caring for their children themselves. Additionally, the story highlights the harsh reality that the evil actions of individuals often come back to haunt them. Mr. Egu and Akwanwa's betrayal of trust and heinous deeds led to their own downfall, serving as a stark reminder that the consequences of one's actions can't be escaped. It is essential to treat others with kindness and integrity, as the repercussions of cruelty and wrongdoing can be severe and far reaching. Thank you for watching this amazing story about Ene on African Stories. If you liked it and learned a lesson from her journey, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.